Welcome, my name is Vishal Tekshimani. Today I'm speaking to Josh Fegan, the CEO of medical cannabis company Althea Group. Josh and I are going to talk about the opportunity in the medical cannabis space and what Althea does. Josh, welcome. How are you?
Good, thank you, Vish. Good morning.
I'm looking forward to a very interesting discussion. Let's talk about your company in a bit, but first I'd really like to know, what is the opportunity in the medical cannabis space? A lot of interest from investors, but I think there needs to be a lot more education around it. What's the opportunity here?
The opportunity is a big one. I think investors are quite excited because they've seen a pretty flourishing medicinal cannabis industry grow out of Canada over the last few years, pardon the pun, where the sector itself has produced about 370,000 registered patients that are using medicinal cannabis on a daily basis and represents an industry approaching the value of about $2 billion in turnover. So Canada was the first federally legalised medicinal cannabis country, and I think Australia is looking to follow suit in terms of its success.
All right, excellent. So let's talk about Althea Group. What makes you different in the medical cannabis field? Because there's a lot of ASX listed companies trying to get into this space. Tell us more about Althea.
Yeah, so Althea prides itself on our education program and also being a technology company. So what we do is work with doctors very closely to educate them about Althea medicinal cannabis products and utilise technology to actually make the prescribing pathways more accessible and easy for doctors to get patients onto medicinal cannabis if the doctor sees fit. For example, we onboarded our first patients in May of 2018. There was about 4 of them for that month. And it was taking the doctors about 4 hours to complete a special access scheme application, which is required by the Therapeutic Goods Administration before a doctor can prescribe the product. So obviously that was very time consuming, and doctors in general are time poor, so that was a huge barrier to entry. What we did to try and alleviate that pressure was create a technology platform called Althea Concierge. Today, doctors can actually do that same application with all the supporting documentation in about 4 minutes. So what that means is doctors are more prepared and able to actually go about prescribing Althea medicinal cannabis, and that means that everyone's getting a lot more comfort and education around this space, and that's creating more doctors helping to prescribe to more patients in need.
Okay, and talk to us more about how that technology and that education, how's that translated into sales? And you've got patients in both Australia and the UK, is that right?
Yeah, correct. So it's translated in patients, which is the equivalent of sales, because all of our patients are buying the Althea medicinal cannabis
crossed
products.
1,000 patients, is that
We
right?
have, yeah. So we recently reached the 1,000 patient milestone and consistently onboarding more than 200 patients a month now, which is a far cry from the 4 that we did back in May of 2018 when we first had product available in the country. So we're seeing significant adoption as we go along, which the patients are paying out of pocket for the medicine, which demonstrates its efficacy and usefulness in terms of a therapeutic medicine. There are some of our competitors that don't have any sales or any patients whatsoever, and I think that's part of the reason why Althea maintains an advantage in Australia and continue to work hard on exploiting and getting more and more doctors and patients involved with our business. In the United Kingdom, we've recently achieved our first patient in terms of getting a script through. That was a huge milestone because it's a very complex system in the UK as well in terms of regulations. But we've also working with a company called Drug Science, which is actually a charity organisation. A gentleman called Professor David Nutt is the head of that charity and is very influential in Europe for the area of addiction. And they're working very closely with our company to go ahead and educate more and more doctors about medicinal cannabis. So much so that they've selected our products to be involved in a national pilot where they're aiming to service about 20,000 patients with medicinal cannabis by the end of 2021, with the aim of creating evidence that would help the NHS, the government, to really fix a place for cannabis within that country. So it's a privilege and a great honour, but they've recognised our advantages as a company, and that's why we're involved with them.
Okay, and let's also compare the proposition of Althea against some of the names that investors can access in other jurisdictions. So at NabTrade, we offer international equities. So there's some New York listed Canadian companies, there's some US cannabis companies, of course. Why consider Althea as perhaps for investors who want to have a series of cannabis companies in their portfolio?
Yep, good question. It really comes down to our advantages, the fact that we really understand medical education and we've leveraged technology to better allow access to medicinal cannabis for both healthcare professionals and patients. That's our advantage, and the reason why that exists is because Australia and the UK is a very highly regulated marketplace in terms of patient access. It's very much a unregistered medicine, and therefore the cumbersome nature of prescribing medicinal cannabis is there for a reason. And you sort of have to know how to navigate that pathway in order to open up what is this marketplace. And the Canadians don't have that level of understanding. Simply put, I would say that Canada, in terms of its medicinal cannabis legislation, is about a 4 out of 10. Australia and the UK would be a 9 or a 10 out of 10.
Yeah, wow.
So it's a knowledge gap, and we have that knowledge and expertise because we've had to navigate this framework, and now we're thriving from it.
All right, excellent. And lastly, let's talk about the risks. So this is a emerging sector. It's a relatively new sector. How would you describe some of the key risks of investing in medical cannabis, and your company in particular as well?
Yeah, so it's a highly regulated marketplace. So I think people need to understand that it is an unregistered medicine, and there is inherent risks around that because it's not registered in the same way that pharmaceutical drugs normally are when launched at market. But in saying that, it represents a really good opportunity if you understand those regulatory pathways and also have the compliance and understanding to do business in such an area, such a space. And that's our advantage. So what is a risk for the market and certainly our competitors is actually a true strength for Althea.
All right, Josh, thank you so much for sharing this information and insights on Althea Group. I'm really glad we could weed out an interesting discussion this Friday morning.
Great, thanks Vish.
No worries. I hope you enjoyed this video. Now please remember, what we talked about today isn't investment advice. If you're thinking about investing in shares of Althea Group or the medical cannabis space in general, it's really important that you do your research and please take your time to understand the sector. My name is Vishal Texanani, and I'll see you next time.